club anniversary. Okay, got knocked out there. Not sure what happened. Okay. Bill is celebrating his 50th club anniversary. I believe it will be December the 10th. So without further ado, Bill, welcome.
Thank you very much, Jerry. It's very interesting that you say that 50 years, it has gone by so quickly. And I've seen so many changes in the Rotary Club. And I have to comment on just what a fabulous job you've done, Jerry, in this last year of keeping our club together. It has nothing but struggle for you, I'm sure. So thank you very much for the opportunity to be one of the last speakers in your term. So my father came home from the First World War in 1918, and he was convinced that starters, generators were going to be common on every car made. The electric starter was pretty much developed by General Motors in 1918. And so he thought everything was going to need a battery. So he started manufacturing batteries. Batteries in those days were made of wood and of course lead and acid inside to make the electricity. So this branding iron was used to brand the name Howitt on the side of the battery. And his company was known as the Howitt Battery. That company went on for almost 100 years here in Windsor, starting on Sandwich Street, where the Cleary Auditorium is now, and moving on to Pitt Street in the back. So I started working at my father's garage when I was 13 years of age. And of course, I swept the floors and ran and got parts for the mechanics and all of that sort of thing. And I started building my first car even before I had a driver's license. That was a 1932 Ford Street hot rod. And since then, over all those years, I've had certainly more than 200 cars. I was involved as a partner with the organization in Chatham at RM. I was involved in the beginning of the Willowstead Classic Car Show, which was put together by 3 Rotarians, 2 others and myself. And that has just been a way of life for us to always have antique cars around. I finished building a 1936 Morgan. I actually had parts for it taken where I found the car inside a cottage down in Blenheim area, where the fellow kept it inside the house. And I restored that, and I ran into a fellow working in Remington Park in his backyard in a garage. And that introduced me to something that was a bit of a phenomenon for me, and that is the tremendous number of men and women that we have in this city who are retired. Most of them took early buyouts from General Motors, Ford, and Chrysler. And the wealth of talent that is here in this city for just about anything automotive that you can think of is still here. A lot of them meet on Saturday morning for coffee, and others have their garage with lots of chairs, and they can build almost anything that you can think of. It's just a small, for instance, this is the name tag that goes on the Bugatti. And that was made out of a piece of aluminum. And you took a photograph off of a book that I had, put it into a computer, punch a button, and the computer cuts it out. It's so easy the way they do it today. But I was at an auction sale in Toronto at a small museum that was closing out, and up for sale what's referred to as a buck. Now, a buck is made of wood, and it looks like a boat upside down. And it's the form that is used to stretch the aluminum over top of to make the shape of the body. And nobody knew really what it was. I was quite aware of it, part of the reason I went to the auction. And so I bought it and brought it home. The intentions were that we were going to make a boardroom table by putting a piece of glass over top of this buck so that you could see the wood down in behind it. So my friend, a fellow by the name of Jim Bailey, as I mentioned, works out of his garage, said, why don't I roll half of a body for it? And then you can have half of it in the shape of the car and the other half will show the wood. I thought that was just a great idea. Let's do that. So he started rolling it. So this basically is what the car looks like. This is a Type 59 Bugatti, which was one of the most famous race cars of all. Bugatti claimed they won more races than all of the cars added together. And I think that took them up to about 1935, and then it changed after that. But the body looked so good on this form that I said, boy, let's finish it, Jim, and make a car. So, okay, what are we going to use for power? And I said, well, I've had steam cars, I've had all kinds of gasoline cars, I've had 16-cylinder, 12-cylinder, 8-cylinder cars. What do you say we make it electric? I should learn more about electric cars. So that's what the beginning of it was. So over the next 2 years, between friends of his who stopped in, who were retired, electricians, body men, welders, shapers, and so forth, even upholstery people that worked at the trim plant. So virtually anything like that can be done here, and we're very fortunate that way. So the whole complete car was built here. We started out by using chalk on the garage floor. We drew out the frame, we laid the steel down, measured it all out, and welded it all together, and we had a frame. And then I found that there was a company in British Columbia that is manufacturing electric motors and all of the controls necessary to make a very small, light truck that was being used in airports where they didn't want to have anything like the firing of a gasoline motor. Now they make trucks. They put 2 electric motors on the front wheels of a tanker truck. They take it out to the airplane, and instead of turning on a PTO and running the motor to pump the fuel into the airplane, they use electricity. So the kit itself for the motor, the transmission, and all of the electronic controls, the computers and so forth, all come from British Columbia. The transmission, now normally you wouldn't need a transmission with an electric car, like a go-kart. You put it in gear and you step on it and away it goes. But I wanted a transmission because I wanted an overdrive gear, if I could get it, to give me more distance for the electric car. And I also knew I was going to want to spin the tires up and smoke them when Chief Atkins wasn't looking. At any rate, we took a Mitsubishi transmission from a front wheel drive car and moved it to the back. So that also gave me 4-wheel steering and swing arms and disc brakes. So it gave you a lot of mechanical advancements. The 4-wheel steering becomes very, very complicated. It really takes a computer to control it. So we dropped the 4-wheel steering and carried on with the build of the car. The suspension itself, Jerry, we maybe should start with some pictures, if you could, please. The suspension of the car itself was made by a retired General Motors transmission shop repair man, a very fine fellow, and his 2 sons are both graduates from St. Clair College and have their own business. His name is Jesse Henke, and they're out on Walker Road, and they in fact build frames for other type of race cars, and they alter and build suspension systems. Now they're very heavy into doing fuel injection on gasoline motors, but there's some more talent that is here in the city. The upholstery was done literally in a barn out on Baseline Road by a fellow who retired from the trim plant, but still does boat cushions and car tops and car cushions and that sort of thing. And he did all of the leather upholstery. Okay, there's the interior of the car showing some of that upholstery. And you may notice that the gauges are totally different than what you're used to, because the gauges, the important thing are how many amps it's using, what the voltage is, how much draw you're taking on it, and how the system is controlling the electricity going through it. The steering wheel is adjustable on this particular car, and you can see where it does have a gear shift, where it goes into a fifth gear, which is overdrive. The switch on the right-hand side that says kill is very exactly that. It's a kill switch. So when you pull that out, it totally eliminates all of the electricity getting away from the batteries. Could you go to a picture from there, Jerry, perhaps of the batteries? All right, there's the batteries. There's 32 batteries in the car. They're lithium ion batteries. And this is a marvelous discovery that's just come up in the last few years. Lithium is only available in 3 or 4 countries in the whole world. And it's starting to get more and more scarce. And it certainly is very, very expensive. A set of batteries like this is about $6,000. And very often when an electric car wears out its batteries, it's just not economical. You may have seen a picture flying around on the internet lately of the police cars in Paris, where all of their electric cars are docked, about 200 of them. And it's more expensive to buy batteries than it is to buy a whole new car. In this particular battery setup here, it starts in that right rear corner on the picture that you can see. And each battery is just over 3 volts, 3.12 volts. And then it goes into the next one and it multiplies itself. And then the next and the next and the next. Each of those little black connections is covered with rubber. And by the time it goes all the way down the length of the batteries, come back and goes down the other end of it, you've got a tremendous amount of electricity. You've got enough electricity that you could power your house for 2 days on just that battery pack right there. You could weld with it, and it's dangerous. It's like playing with the electric chair. So it's covered with plastic over top of that. And then all of the tools that I use are covered with rubber. So that just in case when I'm tightening a bolt, this end of the handle hits, at least you have some rubber insulation. Same with my screwdrivers, and virtually every tool that I use on working on the car is insulated from electricity. It would be a tremendous, if you ever dropped a wrench on top of it, the explosion would probably clear the whole block, a whole city block. That's how bad. You'll see fires from Teslas and other cars like that. So Jerry, could you go to the next slide, please? That shows the side of the car with the panel removed. This particular car carries its own battery charger with it. The battery charger plugs into 120 volts or 240 volts. I have both of those in my garage. So it has a fan to keep it cool. The computer has 5 fans underneath it. They're only small fans about that big. And then just to the right of that part of the engine compartment is what's called a DC-DC converter. So you've got in a battery about 100, and I looked at it today, it's got 104 volts in it now, usually about 107 volts in it. And that DC-DC converter takes it down to 12 volts, so I can run the headlights and the horn and the computer, and it's got a backup camera and a GPS and so forth in it as well. One of the great problems to deal with is the fact that all batteries, as you may know very well of, are DC, direct current, and all motors are AC, alternating current. So it has to go to the computer, which would maybe be the next picture, please, Jerry. And okay, that shows the motor itself, and you'll see the big heavy cables coming in there. The one on the left is going in, is bringing the voltage from the battery. The other 3 are coming from the computer, and they are what's referred to as a three-phase. Now, I said that all motors are AC, alternating current. That's not really true. Elevators are DC current, but an elevator motor is huge. It's as big as a small automobile. So there's the computer that sits behind the driver's seat, and the electricity comes in to the right. That fuse over there to the right where the red cable is 750 amps. And I think, as you know, amps in your house would be 25, maybe 30 for your stove, but most amps are around 25. So this one is playing with 750 amps on it. So we're dealing with a tremendous amount of electricity. Next slide, please, Terry. That's with the back tilted back. It goes over center. You'll start to see some of the talent involved from the people, particularly this fellow, Jim Bailey, who made and formed all of this aluminum. That tail, see that tail light down below? He made that tail light. He made those seats, the insides of the door. Absolutely every piece of the car is aluminum other than the frame itself. And you'll start to see some of the suspension. Next picture, please, Jerry. That's the breathing system for the end of the motor. You really must keep the motor as cool as you possibly can. This one is not run with a cooling system. Some of the race cars are using water to actually cool the motor. You begin to see parts of the suspension there. So we had to make the upper control arms and the lower control arms and this horizontal line. Everything that you see is using aviation joints. They have zero tolerance, so there's no play in them at all. They're tremendously strong and they're expensive. I might throw that in as well. Next picture, please. This is the other end of it. That's the Mitsubishi transmission. The black part is the inspection plate. The silver is the actual transmission. So we had the electric motor, which I got from British Columbia, the Mitsubishi transmission, which I got out of a junkyard. We took that to a fellow who has a computer. He photographed the motor, put that in the computer, photographed the transmission, put that on top of it in the computer, massaged it, and then puts a piece of 1/2-inch aluminum down on the plate, and a water jet comes down and cuts out this adapter to go from the transmission to the motor. We also made the flywheel, made it out of aluminum, and we acquired an aluminum racing clutch. So everything inside is aluminum. The motor, which is quite amazing to me, spins up to about 6,000 RPM, which is pretty high for an electric motor. Next picture, please. There's a picture of the disc brakes on the rear end, showing you a little more of it. That's called coil over spring, basically used by racing cars. It's on more of an angle. If you saw that suspension in a Jeep, it would be straight up and down. For going hard into a corner and giving the wheel a lot of support, it runs on that angle like that. And the brakes, as you can see, are discs. The aluminum piece to the white is a spacer to keep the wheel out. I had a chance to buy 4 tires from a racing car, which I did. I got them home, they're 17-inch tires, and I started looking for wheels. I couldn't find wheels anywhere, so we had to have the wheels made for the car, which were made down in Akron, Ohio by a wheel company down there. Next picture. That's more of an indication to show you how you can take aluminum and anneal it and bend it into the shape that you get there. Now that is one piece, that particular one. The mirror next to it that Jim made is made out of several pieces of aluminum welded together. But all of the moldings and the trim and that headlight, all of that is made from a flat piece of 4x8 sheet steel. It really is an amazing talent to form a headlight like that. We made that grill. There's the tag I showed you sitting on the front of it. Now, while we're at that, I wanted to let you know there is no paint on the car. And you'll say, what's all that black? Well, once again, This is what's known as wrap. And this is made in Canada, overnight delivery. And it's like a vinyl type of finish. And you peel it off, wet the surface first to get rid of static electricity, and then you lay it out as smoothly as you possibly can, and then use a heat gun on it, and it shrinks up and tightens itself down tight to the steel. So if you get tired of that black, you just peel it off and you can put red on, or you can put white on, or whatever. It's very common. You'll see pickup trucks running around the city with camouflage on them. And now the city of Windsor is using it on buses where it goes right across glass or anything else. The idea of that is that when you spray paint, there's a tremendous amount of pollution that goes in the atmosphere. All of the big production shops, such as Chrysler's, where they do their painting, are washed down by water. So there's a big drain in the center of the booth where all the painting is done. And you do the spray painting, and the spray is taken out of the air and it goes down into the drain. It's highly polluted. It has to be treated and so forth. So this is probably the way of the future of what we'll be doing with automobiles, is covering them with this type of wrap. Next picture, please, Terry. Once again, the upholstery, the seats that were made, and that's just the lid on the back. So we can go from there. There's the computer showing the electricity coming in. As I mentioned, that first fuse is 750. The second fuse is 550. Next. The straps hold the hood down. That was just kind of a nostalgic touch. Those louvers down at the front are all hammered by hand over a little small steel model that you make that goes underneath the steel. You heat it up and you hammer them out by hand, one by one by one. Long process. Now, in production today, you would put that in a stamping machine and it would move itself up a half an inch each time it stamps, and it would stamp it out automatically. We didn't have one of those big stamping machines, so that's what we use. Next picture, sir. So here's some hot rodder coming flying out of the garage in this totally silent electric machine. And we'll talk about the performance. The speed of the car is surprisingly fast. It's all aluminum. It weighs 1,700 pounds. And on paper, when you work out what the differential ratio is, what the size of the tires are, and how high the overdrive ratio is and the RPMs, it would come out to the fact that the car should do about 120 kilometers an hour. I've only had it up to 60 miles per hour. So I haven't gone any higher than that. But that's the way they figure it. That would be with one person in it on a perfectly smooth road. When you get into an electric car, you'll find that the hills bother it a lot and the weight of the vehicle bothers it. We can talk a little more about that in a minute. The acceleration of the car is what really is the fun. It goes from 0 to 60 miles per hour in 5 seconds. So it's very, very quick. Now, the main question we get asked a lot too is, how far will it go on a charge? Well, it depends on how many people you have in the car, what the terrain is. Like when this car runs around Muskoka up and down the hills, it won't get nearly as good a distance travel as it will here in Windsor on perfectly flat road. It goes about 70 miles before it needs a recharge. So a recharge is done by bringing it back and plugging it into its own battery charger into the garage. A full charge from a total discharge is 7 hours on 120 volts. I was going to have to answer the phone here. I started to say that a full charge is 7 hours on 120 volts. On 240 volts, it charges in just under 4 hours. It's interesting also that it's estimated that a full charge of this car is about $19 based on what your electric charges are today and how long you have to run it and so forth. So it comes down to the fact that there's no question electric cars are going to be the way of the future. And there's no question it's very good for our atmosphere, for clearing up the air and for noise pollution and other things like that. There are a lot of things to be solved yet. One is the cost of operation. The other is the distance that you can go without stopping. I have a friend with a Tesla that was coming from Ottawa to Windsor, and you call up Tesla and they tell you how far you can go, what the train is, and where your next charging station is. So he drives from Ottawa to about Woodstock, goes into Woodstock, plugs it in, and goes in and has lunch, comes out, he has Netflix in the car, turns on his Netflix, and waits for about an hour and a half for the car to come up to a full charge, and then carries on to Windsor. So that is not a convenience. And if you were going to leave here and drive to Toronto, depending if you had 2 or 3 people in the car, if you had the air conditioning on, if you had the rear defroster on, if you had the heater on, any of those things, they all use electricity. You likely wouldn't be able to get to Toronto on one charge. Excuse me. I'll go for my drink of water. I could open up for questions. I'm not sure what all. I told you about the speed of the car. There's a picture of a famous race car driver coming up here. I think maybe it's next. There he is.
Can I get your autograph, Jerry?
Absolutely.
Jerry, thank you very much for the opportunity of showing this car and talking a little bit about some of my hobby. And once again, I mentioned I was very, very pleased to be able to get on the agenda while you're still our president.
Okay, open for questions. John Marsh.
Bill, that was really, really interesting. As many of us have vehicles coming up for replacement, are we at the stage we would be looking at an electric or a hybrid? And what are the concerns about disposing these batteries when that time is up?
Right at the present time, Don, the city of Windsor has a disposal system. And the last time I used up a set of batteries, I took them over to the city, called them up, got permission to do it and so forth, and took them over to the city dump. Number 2, I would definitely recommend a hybrid. A hybrid has a gasoline motor on the car. Also, there are some cars such as Porsche that develop heat from the brakes. Every time you put the brakes on, it runs a generator that throws a small charge into the battery. So they're getting more and more distance. Volvo is very good at it. BMW has some of the best batteries out there. And all of the ones that are the longer distance, high performance cars are expensive cars. Now, Cadillac has made the statement that they're going to switch in 1 or 2 years, that every Cadillac made will be an electric car. So it's going to be interesting. Right now, Tom Goebel and I were talking. Tom is trying to get battery chargers into Solidarity Towers, because the next thing is, if we all go out, everybody, even in our Rotary Club, and bought an electric car, I'm not sure where we're all going to plug them in. But you'll notice there were 2 places to plug in at the Komodo Club. And Tim Hortons in Chatham has a plug-in. Tim Hortons started at one stage to have electric plug-ins at every Tim Horton, but that hasn't happened yet. So Don, it should be on your calendar. My opinion, I would buy one more gasoline powered car, Don, and just let the development take place. There's some wonderful things coming on. We will eventually get away from lithium ion. Lithium can be mixed with other metals as well, but there are hydrogen cars that are coming on and other electric cars, and the batteries are getting better and better all the time, as opposed to just carrying twice the weight and putting in twice as many batteries. They looked at that with the Pacifica. Tom has a Pacifica too. And the whole lower floor of the Pacifica is taken up with batteries. The original Pacificas had a range of about 20 miles, maybe 30, depending on how hard you drove it and whether it was summer or winter. And there are cars out there. Ford have cars out. General Motors has a car out, and they're only expected to go 20 miles to 35 miles, and then the gasoline motor cuts in. They're made for shopping around the city and that sort of thing. And I think that you'll see a lot of the cities getting into them for delivering parking tickets and that kind of thing, particularly where a car can be used, such as they do at the airport, go out to an airplane, come back, and then plug it back in. So you very often can plug them in, which makes it a lot more convenient.
Craig, do you have a question?
Oh, I have many questions. And Bill, thank you so much for sharing that. So interesting and so many questions. Going straight to the batteries, the lithium ion, is each battery one cell? If it is more than one cell, does the charger that you use balance them, the batteries automatically balance the charge, or do you need to keep track of that on a regular basis to make sure that the batteries are being charged equally?
Greg, that's a very, very good question, and I should have covered that. Number one, yes, they are one cell, and you can put them upside down, lay them on their side. It doesn't matter to them because there's no liquid in it. And the other thing that I probably didn't mention, they're very light. So, you know, every computer you've got, every telephone you've got is using lithium. All of the model airplanes and model sailboats and so forth are using it too. One of the most important parts of having the battery, and that's how I ruined my first set of batteries, is it needs what's called a BMS, a battery monitoring system. And Greg, I think you'd find it interesting that in my case with the 32 batteries, the computer, the battery monitoring system reads that and it finds which is the lowest cell. And then it doesn't charge that cell. It brings all the others down to that level and then evenly charges all of them at the same time.
That's interesting.
It's interesting when you start bringing cells down too, Greg, is you create a lot of heat. So the majority of the heat on the batteries is created from running them down to get to the level of the lowest battery. It didn't show in the picture, but each one of the batteries has a BMS system on it, and it's got a green light on it. And I even have to turn off the lights in my garage, but if I go look at it, and it will show me which cell is low of the 32 of them that are there. If I had had more room, I probably would have gone for more batteries. And I would have run it to that stage of getting over 100 volts and then go in a parallel to get a second 100 volts. Now, I made the battery tray, as you may have noticed on the first one, in its own case for the safety of it. It's in a cage as well. But in the racing cars, they slide out like a drawer. And they're working on that for some of our cars as well. So that in a racing car, you pull into the pit when the batteries are going dead, because there's a Formula E car, which is Formula Electric, and they slide the tray out and slide a new tray in, and away you go with fresh batteries. So then they recharge those that are there. I don't think we'll see that on regular cars on the street. They do them on scooters. When you get a little scooter, like a Bird scooter that runs out of electricity, you just slide the battery out, slam another one in, put it back on the road again.
Is lithium ion the standard right now in the industry, or do you see anybody going towards lithium polymer?
Lithium polymer is definitely being looked at. And one other oh dear, why can't I bring up the name of the metal that they're using as well, which we have a lot of it in Canada. It's in Ontario as well.
Nickel metal hydrate?
Yes, exactly. Yes, good for you. That's exactly what it is. So right now, it seems the safest, easiest is lithium ion. So, and the lightness of it as well. But I can see that there's got to be an end to the amount of lithium out there because we can't recycle it. We
I
can't
think most
clean
of the lithium in the world comes out of mines in Russia, which is a problem for us, yes.
it. And it could be a real bad problem. You know, if we were on very, very bad terms with Russia, they could just cut it off totally. So you're right.
Thank you, Bill. Thank
You're
you.
welcome.
Okay, Dave.
Well, Bill, first of all, I think this has been just a terrific talk. And I'm looking forward to getting my copy of the recording so that I can forward it to my friends. But I also wanted to ask, well, is it fair to ask what the plan is for the car's career after this point?
Dave, for one, great to see you. You look good. Dave is one of the people that I admire. His knowledge, his library, and so forth has been a help to me many, many times. Dave, the car is sold. The deal is done and the car is sold, and I'm starting to make arrangements for delivery of it. It's going to a fellow in Muskoka, and he is very active with the Antique Boat Organization. And he was the one who raised the money in the very beginning. They bought 5 cottages and they tore them down and they built a museum, and they're storing the boats inside there. And they have 2 steam boats that are running on steam. And Dave, as you know, when you operate a steam engine, you shoot the steam down on top of the piston. You also inject oil on top of that. And then you don't reuse the steam, it's pumped out. Obviously, it's a boat, you got lots of water, so it's no trouble. But it does leave a very slight trail of oil on top of the water. And if the sun is in just the right direction, a number of people in Muskoka have been complaining about it. Well, wouldn't you know, the museum has acquired a 3rd boat. And the 3rd boat is Lady Eaton's personal yacht. And it's in very bad shape. It was down in New York State in the Finger Lakes division, and they're refurbishing the whole boat now. And they've pulled out the boilers and all of the steam engine, and they're converting it to be an electric boat. So I've been talking with them, what little bit of advice that I could give them. They've let the contract. The boat is being refurbished and it's being now repowered with electric. So they're going to use my car as a fundraising attraction. So it's going to the museum in Gravenhurst. That's where you'll see it this summer. And they'll have a docent that'll be staying with the car that has the training to tell you what's going on with it. And here's how it works, and please give us money. So that's what it's going to be used for the next little while.
Okay, Doctor.
Bill, I also enjoyed your talk,
Thank you, Doctor.
not only for the kind of passion and enthusiasm with which you described, and the extraordinary effort you took to put it together. I really appreciate the sharing that. But my mind went back. This is a sports car. It's going to drive without any noise. And I go back to my first car, Volkswagen Beetle. It had less than 80 horsepower, but I enjoyed the little sound. It was roaring through the town. So you're going to miss that in this type of vehicles. How did you feel? Thank you.
We had to put a very loud horn on it for one thing. Thank you for your comments. I appreciate that. I want to go back and just mention again, I don't want to use up any more of the time. There are so many very talented men and women in this city. And I had a friend who had a very early 1952 Jaguar, and he was complaining about how hot the car ran. And they said, why don't you put air conditioning in it? No, you can't put air conditioning in a Jaguar. Sure you can. Within 3 days, they installed air conditioning on the car and then gave it back to him and said, now what do you want? He said, well, I'd like power windows. No problem. Put power windows in the car. It's nothing is too much of a challenge for these guys. And I just love getting together and having coffee and picking their brains about what we're going to do about this, that. You'll get 5 guys and we'll get talking about how we're going to work the brakes on that front axle. You'll get 15 opinions, but you'll come out ahead. A lot of talent around.
Tom, did you have a question?
Yeah, first of all, I think our train station has, in addition to the Kubota Club, the rechargers. If you go to the Metro Airport in Detroit side, I know the South Cell waiting parking has one, and maybe the North one. But my question to you is, you talked originally about having 4-wheel drive, and then you dropped it. So did you end up with front wheel or rear wheel drive?
No, it was 4-wheel steering, Tom. When I took the transmission from the front of the Mitsubishi, it gave me steering. So it's 2-wheel drive, rear wheels, and 1 motor in my case. Now, the hot cars like Tesla have 2 motors, 1 on each front wheel, and they're front wheel drive with 1 motor on each. In my case, the 4-wheel steering is like a forklift truck. You'll see it working where the rear wheels steer it so that you can direct the forks easier on it. But it's very difficult. At low speed in your garage, it works easily. But when you get out on the road and are traveling 30 or 40 miles an hour even, and you just go to turn slightly, it'll jump to the left. It'll jump over a whole lane. So the people that are using it, like Porsche, use 4-wheel steering. It needs its own computer to multiply how much demand you've put on the steering. I don't think we're going to see very much of 4-wheel steering in the future. 4-wheel, very common.
You know, does this mean you're going to ask Santa Claus for a set of fiberglass tools?
I wonder. Well, we've already started on the next car, and I'm well along the way on the next one. And I've gone back to a gasoline engine, and it's a 1937 flathead Ford V8 that I'm making, and we're adapting a supercharger, which they never had them. So we're adapting a supercharger to it now. And once again, I'm working with a guy in his garage out behind his house, where he's even got a CNC machine there, and we're cutting out pieces for mounting. So that'll be the next one I talk to you about.
Okay, any other questions? Well, I just got to say, I spent an hour and a half with Bill last week going through the car, and of course he let me sit in it, which was very nice. I thought it was going to be a goodbye presidential gift, but I hear it's going to Muskoka now, so that's a little disappointing. But you know, Bill could go on all afternoon, and I don't think anyone would sign up because it's so interesting to hear Bill talk about not just about this vehicle, but of his passion for cars. And you know, we got into the history of the automotive world, which, you know, I think it was 2 weeks ago, was the 125th anniversary of Henry Ford taking his first little jaunt in his first vehicle, and he was living on Larned Street in downtown Detroit. So, and we kind of ended it with, and to think, you know, whether you're talking, you know, in this case, we were talking primarily automobiles, but I brought up Motown, and I said to think that this is just literally miles away from where we live in Windsor here. How fortunate we are. When you think of that whole Ford history, how just within miles of where we live, all this happened. It was just an interesting afternoon. And if you ever get the opportunity, I'm sure if you bring him a coffee, he'll be glad to show you his little workshop and see the next project he's working on. So Bill, on behalf of everyone, again, thank you so much. It was a pleasure having you.
My pleasure. Thank you.